press right now about this one too. And it really is the combination of kind of these three other little tools that are combined, similar to the way the BRAT model works with a fuzzy inference system, to then come up with these sort of management categories. And essentially what it's saying is, okay, what's the vegetation departure from your historic conditions to the existing conditions, and that number, you know, the closer you are to historic conditions, obviously you're probably in better condition than if it's completely different than your historic conditions. Another part of that is you can actually see how that change happened, whether it was from conifer encroachment and these other methods. We then look at the accessibility or connectivity of the floodplain. Do you have a lot of infrastructure in your floodplain? That's going to influence your riparian condition. And then the land use intensity within the valley bottom. And so that information is summarized over these discrete units and then applied to like a 250-meter reach scale. So again, the riparian condition assessment tool combines a riparian vegetation departure plus, so that's this right here. So this is basically looking at a particular alluvial valley saying, hey, this red color, there's been a large departure from historic conditions to the darker green is a more negligible departure from recent conditions or historic conditions. It takes that, it takes this floodplain fragmentation information. So this is again looking within that valley bottom at the areas that are currently accessible to the river versus inaccessible through human infrastructure or, well, in this case, typically human infrastructure. And then it combines that information with land use intensity, again, in a fuzzy inference system to then come up with maps like this. So this is, again, preliminary data. We're still working on this stuff, but this is a riparian condition assessment for the whole state. Okay, so, and then another part of this is this riparian recovery potential tool. This is a little bit further behind the development, but we're getting there, and it basically uses inputs from aspects of the riparian condition tool and then products of the riparian condition tool, so some of the input data and output data to predict riparian recovery potential, which is basically a particular stream segment's sort of ability to get back on a trajectory towards recovery over the next 50 to 100 years given a particular management intervention. And so it considers sort of the inherent properties of a site and its natural capacity for adjustment over time versus what are the anthropogenic limiting factors and the sort of network topology to say, well, you know, if I've got this good condition reach right downstream from this completely hammered section, the recovery potential is going to be different here than it would be if it was right downstream from another good condition reach. So we consider all those different kinds of things. We're doing a test right now in the Weaver on this, so I did a different type of test when we're comparing. Anyway, so these are what we think to be pretty powerful planning tools that can be useful in restoration planning, as well as other management efforts within your watershed. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the portion of the talk where I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the case studies of some of our existing projects that we have going on with the division. So I'm just showing them here in a simple little map, and I'll talk about each one of them briefly. Okay, so starting out with this project in Basin and Mahogany Creeks in western Box Elder County. Here, and let me just step back to say what our main idea is with all these different case studies is essentially there's a lot of pretty well established ideas in the scientific literature about the natural effects of beaver dam building, and we're saying, hey, can we take these well-established relationships and can we apply them in different places with different geomorphic settings, trying different techniques to get the same outcomes, and can we learn as much as we can as we're doing it? So that's really the intent with these case studies, is to test out different aspects of beaver restoration that we don't know much about now, and then find out as much as we can and make that information available. So here so we have slightly different but related objectives in each one of these projects. So in Basin Creek, we're asking, can we partner with Beaver to help restore this incised stream that has degraded riparian vegetation, and can we influence hydrology in a positive way? So in this situation, we're working with Kent Sorensen from the Ogden office here, and he really kind of brought this project to our attention. Had a landowner approach him who had beaver stored on the property. They were trapped out, and then his stream basically started to unravel, so it vertically downcut not drastically, there's sections of it that aren't in that bad of shape, but in a lot of portions it's basically creating a barrier for his cattle, and lowered the water table drastically, so you've seen this really reduction in the quality of riparian veg. So beaver were recently extirpated here, but the habitat's still in pretty good shape. That's what this BRAT map is showing. And then this is actually showing the location of a bunch of beaver dam analogs that we built back in 2014 to try and initiate some riparian recovery to then encourage our transplanted beaver to use those BDAs down there. So again, the objectives: restore inside streams, trying to enhance floodplain connectivity, increase water storage temporarily behind dams, and ultimately try to increase forage production for the landowner. And the method that we're using here is a more within that sort of list of from kind of more passive to active approaches of different methods of beaver restoration. This is a more active method where significant portions of the project area, there's just no riparian veg at all. So we're trying to basically, we live planted a bunch of willows, and we're trying to get some regrowth in those areas to encourage beaver to take over the maintenance of some of these dams. We built a bunch of them. We've been having some issues with our relocation efforts. We got one beaver in there in late fall of 2014. It did not survive the winter, and we put 2 more beaver in there this last fall. We'll see how they do. We've been doing topographic change detection, as well as some other aquatic habitat monitoring methods, and really what the main deliverables that are going to come out of this project for the division are these monitoring results. So we'll be able to look at the change detection, look at if there's been a positive influence on in-stream fish habitat from the project, and we're developing what I mentioned before, this UDWR specific restoration design manual. And so, the lessons that we learn here and all these projects we're working on throughout the state, they're all going into that document that will hopefully be a useful tool for the division moving forward. The division, particularly Sorno, has been carrying out the beaver relocation. I've been helping them a little bit, but yeah, we've got a few beaver, need to get some more up there. So we're going to continue to relocate beaver there until they become established. That's the plan. So another project just right over the hill from Basin and Mahogany Creek, also in western Dock Selvar County, is a project with similar but slightly different objectives. In this case, we are working with the division and the Tanner family, who many of you may know. They own a bunch of property out here in the Grass Creek watershed, and Jay Tanner is really eager to try a beaver project. And one really nice thing about working with him is that he doesn't have any problem talking with agency folks and the media. He likes to be kind of a poster guy, and so it makes it a little bit easier for us to work with somebody who has that kind of attitude. And anyway, so here we're mainly looking right now at working in most of Pine Creek. A nice opportunity here because the Tanner family basically owns this whole watershed, so we can actually look at sub-watershed scale restoration and the sort of influences that might have on changes in hydrology, positive changes in hydrology at the scale of the whole sub-watershed. So it's a very unique opportunity for us to do that. And the way that we're going about the design on this is to start small with a pilot project and then work our way up to trying to figure out a study design that's going to allow us to capture changes at that sub-watershed to watershed scale. So we're looking at this as a long-term project that we're really hoping to nail that hydrology story with this one. And so basically, the current condition out there is pretty similar to Basin Creek. We're actually looking to maybe use one of the tributaries of Basin Creek as a control stream for some of the other treatments that we try down here. So the current condition in Grouse Creek is again pretty similar to Basin Creek, but there's a lot more variability in geomorphic setting in terms of incision depth and the condition of riparian veg. So we can try out these different techniques across a range of different conditions to essentially try and identify what's sort of the minimum level of effort that we can do in a particular place to garner the most benefit. Okay, again, our main kind of interest with our lab for this is to try and do a really good job of documenting the changes in hydrology that we anticipate. And again, just threw this up as a reminder of what we expect to see. And so these things are measurable, obviously. And so we are going to go out and put out a pretty extensive network of pressure transducers to be able to get basically hydrological information from all these streams throughout the year. And we're working real closely with Eric Thacker, who's with the USU Extension Office, and to basically try and monitor the changes in sage-grouse habitat. So this is important sage-grouse country out here, which Avery could tell you all about. So, you know, what some of the recent work on sage-grouse coming out of like the Sage-Grouse Initiative is Jeremy Mastis published a paper basically saying, hey, sage-grouse really rely on these near riparian mesic areas for important late-season brood-rearing habitat. And so what we're saying is by an expansion of the riparian areas, you're actually creating more of that mesic area, which is critical for sage-grouse. So we want to monitor the expansion of the riparian area, mesic areas, and any kind of response in sage-grouse from that. And we believe, and the science suggests too, that, I mean, when you start to water your floodplain more, you're providing more water to grow whatever happens to be there. So we actually expect to get a lot more cattle forage out of this too, and that's part of why the tanners are excited about this project. This is just a quick little kind of rundown of all the different things we're trying to do out there. I'm starting to run out of time, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I just have a few more slides on the sand raft, and then I'll wrap up. So I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with this project. This is another large-scale collaborative pilot project using Beaver, teaming up with a division as well as BLM and some other Utah State labs to see if we can do anything with Beaver down on a sand-bedded, hydrologically flashy desert river. And so this is the first project of its kind trying to work in that type of environment using Beaver. Beaver are already there. Let me just step back and say that kind of the current condition of the lower sand raft is through diverted flows. What we've seen over time, there's been some really great work that has come out of Jack Schmidt's lab on this, basically showing how the channel's narrowed and the tamarisks have become dominant within the floodplain, kind of enhancing that channel narrowing and extensive floodplain aggregation that has left much of the lower sand raft in a functionally incised condition where it barely ever can access its floodplain, which is creating all these problems for in-stream habitat. And so what the idea here is that, well, you know, they're doing this large-scale tamisk removal, the division is, down something like 20 or 30 acres of the lower sand raft. And the idea is hey, if we pull all this tamarisk out, we get beaver dams going in the stream to try and create a more dynamic and higher sinuosity within the channel. Are we going to see more luck basically eroding into those banks and creating more complex in-stream habitat if we don't have all that tamarisk there sort of locking up the bank? So that's one of the main things we're testing there. Our little piece of this project is basically just designing, building, and maintaining the beaver dam analogs. And so, you know, there are beaver that are present now in the lower sand raft. So we've got two different little treatment reaches here for our pilot. And there are beaver throughout this area. They're not at very high densities, and their dams don't last very long because they don't have any large material to work with. And they have these functionally incised conditions that just get ripping during spring runoff and blow out their dam. So we built 38 different pilot structures in 8 different complexes, testing all these different structure types in different conditions. And I forgot to mention too, there's actually this gravel augmentation component to the project that we're not actually directly involved in, but another lab, Jack Schmidt's lab, is doing that. So what we've learned so far, there are some unique challenges to trying to work in a desert river. Just the logistics of getting around down there, and then last summer with the hydrology, with those big flows we had in the spring, that really made some of our implementation difficult. And we saw, but we still got the project in, and we're pretty happy with some of our results. Definitely kind of mixed results, and what we've been realizing is that our designs for the beaver dam analogs really need to be tailored for a desert river, and relying more on constriction dams, and basically the emphasis is trying to get dams that will last, because we had a lot of them blow out last summer. But the ones that did stay put and did well, we saw extremely rapid aggregation behind the dam. So over a meter of sand built up in less than 2 months behind this main dam here, and then we see a real substantial increase in topographic complexity downstream of this dam. That sand-bedded river is really easy to move the bed around, and so we see some really deep scour pools and mid-channel bars just downstream of this structure. And we actually did see some beaver use on some of the structures. Just really quick, I'm going to go through some of these other ones. So we did see some pretty intensive widening around some of them, which was what we were actually trying to accomplish, to create more of that in-stream topographic complexity. And then we have been playing around with new designs for some of these constriction dams, where we're actually using some of the tamarisk that they removed. They piled it up in these big piles, you can barely see it up here, on the floodplain. And so a lot of that stuff has been actually sitting out, desiccating for, in this situation, over 5 years. So we felt comfortable using some of that material in our dams. It's just right there, easy to use. And so we basically are building up all this debris in front of the dams and then putting in some posts there to basically try and dissipate or reduce your unit stream power as it hits this thing. So it's all about basically trying to protect your dams and get them to last for a while down there. And then this is a full channel spanner where we used a bunch of tamarisk, and we're actually using a little bit of weed-free straw to kind of create more impermeable dam faces. So this project is ongoing. We're gonna continue to learn as much as we can from these different designs, and we've sort of updated our monitoring protocol for this next year, where we're gonna do these more intensive Columbia Habitat Monitoring Program monitoring methods and a variety of other things. So that's going on, and then I'm just going to wrap up here with some pending projects we have. One from Birch Creek, Utah. We put in a WRI proposal on that one, and here we'd be working with the Division of BLM to essentially try and get some restoration of in-stream and floodplain conditions on the side stream. There's sage grouse there too, and Bonneville cutthroat trout. So we're moving forward with that project. And then we might be developing this project with the water resources and a variety of other organizations in the Sandpitch watershed, where some of you may be familiar with the 12-mile canyon. There was a series of massive landslides back there in the 80s and 90s that they're still dealing with water quality, sediment control issues there. And so we're going to see if there's any role that Beaver can play in that. So those are the projects we've got going on right now, and a lot of people have been involved in them, but we really just want to really send out a big thanks and a lot of appreciation for the division and all the folks we've been working with at the division, particularly Kent Sorensen, Dan Keller down on that Sand Raft project, and really everybody's been really great. So we're just happy to have these opportunities, and I'll end it there.
Just questions, all?
Do you know what the survival rate for the introduced beaver is?
Yeah, so it varies pretty drastically depending on how you go about the relocation. And so the timing of the year makes a big difference. Typically you want to do it in the fall, and you want to try and get ideally the whole family unit. So if you just relocate, one individual, typically they'll take off to go look for their families. Is kind of what's thought. So, and then also people have had better success building artificial lodges for them in places where you want to put them, and then also creating habitat for them with the beaver dam analogs. And so there's a group, I want to say, let me just step back and say, so there's this guy, Mark McKinstry from Wyoming, who did a lot of early beaver relocation efforts in the 90s, and he wrote a lot of that stuff up, and over the hundreds of relocation efforts he did, he had about a 40 to 50% success rate in getting them to stick. So not great, but other groups have had a lot better than that, basically using different techniques like I talked about, of paying more attention to the timing and trying to get the whole family, as well as building some kind of infrastructure for them. So these groups in Washington, there's one group in particular, the Metau Beaver Project. They've been doing this forever, and they have actually a whole capture facility. And so that's actually another component that people think really ups your success rate, is when you get nuisance beaver from somewhere, you need to hold them somewhere for a while. And they have actually been able to sort of create new breeding pairs within the capture facility. Beavers taken from different places, they get together there, and then they ship them out as a couple, and they've had better success like that too.
I recall some discussion of modeling potential water storage benefits of, watershed scale beaver restoration. Maybe the first Weaver Confluence talk.
Yeah, that was
So
probably.
where's that going?
Yeah, so that was probably, was that Conrad Hafen maybe who gave that one? Don't know.
Terrible news. Sorry.
Okay, well, so within our, that's a question we're very interested in within our lab group, and obviously in general, I think it's a question of interest. And so we've got a master's student working on that right now. And I actually probably should have mentioned it in this presentation, but a lot of these on-the-ground projects we're doing, part of why we're trying to establish a pretty extensive gauge network is actually to have data that he can then use to calibrate his model. And so he's actually been making some progress on it. He's got the water storage capacity part of it working pretty well. So he's able to model just volumes of water that could potentially be stored behind dams based on sort of the topography of the DEM and a variety of other things. It'd be better for him to talk about it, but I know he's moving forward with that, and he's going to be more involved with some of these other projects, kind of getting the data that I'm helping to generate. He's going to be using that. So
I think it'd be a great brown bag. Maybe you can invite water resources downstairs.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm sure it'd be great, great opportunity for Conrad too. Any other questions? Yeah.
Going back to your Chalk Creek example, we talked about current beaver in that area was about 33% of potential.
Mm-hmm.
So what's limiting them now? If there's already beaver there, what are some of the limiting factors, and how would managers go about addressing those?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just wanted to get back to that slide real quick. So one of the ways that you can try and encourage their dam building in places where they aren't already doing it is through using the beaver dam analog. So typically in places where you still see fairly healthy or robust beaver populations, it's where you would expect. So higher up in the watershed where there's less possibility for conflict and there's less human infrastructure up there and typically less development. So a lot of times it's about trying to kind of bring them down into the watershed where they were historically and were probably sort of bumped up in the places where humans were doing less work, and so over time. And so beaver dam analogs, you can use those to create conditions that are better for them, and basically try and do it somewhere close by where they already are. Or you can just straight up try and relocate them from one portion of the watershed to another. But to get them to stay put, you need something that's enticing them. Sometimes people will go as far as even providing food for them, like bringing in aspen to try and help them get started. But the BRAT tool is a good first cut to kind of at least tell you where you might want to start looking, to put them. And so, with these different beaver management zones, we created these different categories. Quick return restoration zone versus places that are in decent shape already, and basically just leave them alone. And so, yeah, you want to be thinking about places where there's a lot of them and putting them where you want them to be. And really, yeah, there's not necessarily one straightforward way to do it. A lot of times you're limited by a particular area that you happen to have to work with, because of the landowner or whatever. And so it's about trying to create the most favorable conditions for beaver right there because the project happens to be going on there.
So would it be like mentioned woody vegetation and water?
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of these places, is it just the lack of woody vegetation currently? And so some of these restoration efforts might increase the woody vegetation for food and dam building? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And what you see in a lot of places, particularly in side streams, is that the hydrology just won't support woody, like good, healthy riparian stands because the river's downcut so much for a variety of reasons. And so what you have to do is basically try and go about restoring hydrologic processes to provide water to then grow the riparian that you want. So, it can be tricky to unravel things like that. But yeah, so that, other things that limit them are obviously just people shooting them, that happens a lot. trapping, particularly in places where you're close by a road, you know, that can be an issue. Since the cost of pelts is not very high anymore, there's not as much of a financial incentive for trapping. And then just, you know, the more infrastructure there is, the more you got to worry about beavers flooding it. So, but really what we find when we look at these watersheds is that there's a lot of places that are safe to encourage their behavior where you don't really need to be thinking so much about potential conflict, because you're in portions of the watershed where there just really isn't much infrastructure. Any other questions? Yeah, thank you.
Some of that.
Yeah, and that is,
Yeah, I've been around
They would. I'd like to see them come out. That's cool. What time we need?
See you again.
You know when roads open now, they get
Yeah.